This is All India Radio. In the program Insights, now we bring you a discussion on India's first sovereign green bonds framework. The participants are Gopal Krishna Agarwal, Economic Analyst, and Ravi Kumar, AIR Correspondent.
Climate change is one of the biggest challenges of the 21st century. Governments, communities, corporates and individuals need to do their part to address climate change. Now, a new financial product is making it easier for companies and investors to do their part. That product is green bond. Green bonds work like regular bonds, but they only invest in projects that are green. When countries issue such bonds, they are called sovereign green bonds. India's commitment to the preservation of the environment is enshrined in Article 48A of the Constitution. India's climate actions have so far been largely financed from domestic resources, and it is now targeting generation of additional global financial resources as well as transfer of technology as committed under the Paris Agreement. In keeping with the ambition to significantly reduce the carbon intensity of the economy, the Union Budget 2022-23 announced the issue of sovereign green bonds. And in February 2022, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in her budget speech announced, and I quote, "As a part of the government's overall market borrowings in 2022-23, sovereign green bonds will be issued for mobilizing resources for green infrastructure. The proceeds will be deployed in public sector projects which help in reducing the carbon intensity of the economy." End quote. And yesterday, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman finalized the framework to issue sovereign green bonds in line with global standards. In order to understand this better, we are joined by Mr. Gopal Krishna Agarwal, who is an expert on this topic. Mr. Agarwal, welcome to All India Radio. Mr. Agarwal, we have generally understood bonds and even green bonds. Please tell us what are sovereign green bonds.
In the sovereign green bonds, it is the payment of principal and the interest is committed by the government, because these are government bonds and the security for these bonds are confirmed by the government. These are bonds which are issued by the government for the domestic and international use, but they carry with them a sovereign guarantee, guaranteed by the government.
So the question that arises, Mr. Agarwal, is why were they required? Our government's borrowing this year is almost 15 trillion rupees. That is around $170 billion US. This proposed green bond is around $2 billion. So why not use normal borrowing methods? Why do we need a special thing called sovereign green bonds?
It will be issued in rupee. It is domestically used bonds, but foreign institutions, etc., and foreign investors can also apply, but it is in the rupee denomination. It is because two objectives are achieved from issuance of these bonds. One is because the funds received from this bond have to be particularly invested into renewable energy, green energy, and projects which are ESG compliant and where environmental sustainability, growth, etc. is committed in those projects. So the funds proceeds from these bonds can only be deployed into these projects, one thing. Second is when it also meets the commitment of the government. We had committed that these bonds will be issued and the government will commit certain funds, particularly for environmental sustainable projects. So under the COP Paris Agreement. So that commitment will also be met. And the third important part is that there are certain investors and global funds and even domestically certain investable funds which only invest into green bonds, and they carry slightly lower rate of interest because they are environmental friendly. So the government has to pay lower rate of interest because they are committed to environmental sustainability. So low rate of interest, it meets the commitment of the government at the international forums for climate change and climate protection, environmental protection. And the third is there is a better monitoring that proceeds from these funds are only invested into specific projects, and those CSUs and other domestic projects which comply to these standards of green bonds, they will get funds for their project. So they may get additional funds other than normal their commitment in the project from the government.
Mr. Agarwal, I was looking at the data, and India's green bonds issuance is the sixth largest in the Asia-Pacific region. Private sector has been issuing green bonds from 2015, and last year we even had Ghaziabad Nagar Nigam. They had a successful 150 crore green bond issue. Small amount, but successful nonetheless. Though $2 billion is a modest beginning, will this be a template for state governments and corporates in India to follow? Because this is supposed to be almost a $1 trillion global market of green bonds.
Yeah, this is an important issue because the government, not only these bonds, the government has given out certain more project incentives and support with regard to solar energy projects, small hydro projects, and then the government has announced several benefits and support and incentives, promotion for green hydrogen energy. So India is taking lead in the green hydrogen energy. Even India has sufficient supply of solar power. With the solar power and the large water resources, the government thinks that it will become a leader in green hydrogen energy. And this is a very important initiative. Many of the projects by certain PSUs and even certain other private sectors have asked that we are short of funds, particularly for investment into this green energy project. So these funds will be made available to those projects. Definitely, we will become one of the leaders in green hydrogen energy and solar power generation. This will have multiple benefits. One thing is that those who comply with this project standards, even at the international bilateral trade and multilateral trade platforms also, those companies will comply to ESG standards. And at international level, those companies who take up projects on environmental sustainable growth projects and are reduce their carbon footprint, their product gets a better value at the international market. So I think this is an important initiative all round. It cannot be seen into an isolation. It has to be looked into several other initiative of Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji on environmental sustainability. That his initiatives on, we see that there is a project for ethanol blending in petrol and diesel. That is also, many projects are coming up for production of ethanol. There successively more and more mixing of ethanol is taking place in petrol and diesel. That is one thing. Solar power, we are taking lot of initiatives to generate more solar power. We have sufficient sunlight. The third thing is green hydrogen initiative by the government. So there are several requirements for the technological development, research and project setup. So all these things together surely will put India on the global map of environmental sustainable and green energy, renewable energy and ESG compliance.
Mr. Agarwal, we looked at what is sovereign green bonds. We also looked at why it is important. But people listening to it would immediately connect with sovereign gold bonds, which were also issued a few years ago, and they become a great success now. So people who are listening in would want to know how to invest in sovereign green bonds. Do they get an opportunity to directly invest with the government, or do they need to buy an ESG mutual fund? How does it work? Please tell us.
The retail participation in government securities is very less in India. Over past some years, and the government through banks, etc., is trying that more and more retail participation takes place in government securities. At present, what happens is RBI issues government securities and they are basically taken up by the banks, and then through banks, some people buy them. But through exchange mechanism, government is thinking that we should give access directly to the retail investors. So stock exchanges like National Stock Exchange, Bombay Stock Exchange also have developed certain platforms where they are inviting more and more retail participation into government securities and government bonds and debt funds, etc. Wholesale debt market is also being developed. So surely all these bonds, etc., will be offered to the retail investors through the exchange platforms, in addition to if they subscribe directly, because retail participation in debt funds is being more and more supported by the government.
Mr. Agarwal, at the heart of COP21, or the Paris Agreement as it is popularly called, which happened in 2015, is NDC, or Nationally Determined Contribution Target. In August this year, India formally updated its NDC target to the UNFCCC, which was initially made in 2015. And if you remember last year, Prime Minister Modi also gave the 2070 target for net zero emissions, and the updated NDC was also approved by the Union Cabinet in August 2022. Mr. Agarwal, please tell us more about this NDC, or the Nationally Determined Contribution Target, and tell us how will the sovereign green bonds help us achieve our NDC targets.
Actually, government has committed that by 2070, we will be net zero carbon emission country. And successively, government wants to reduce the carbon footprint, the emissions levels of the carbon in various government projects or various industries, etc. And in that also, government is incentivizing. These targets have been committed by different sovereign countries at the COP Paris Conventions. And successively that are being met, and government is working towards the meeting those targets, though they are quite challenging that come to the net zero emission. But if you compare it with the global standards, India's carbon emission footprints are quite low in comparison to developed countries. The thing is that India is pushing at international platforms that developed countries should bear more cost on environmental sustainable energy or green energy, etc. Once these funds are committed by international developed countries and other countries, more and more funds will be available. Ultimately, we have to move towards net zero carbon emission, and therefore some more initiatives are also being taken, like carbon trading between countries and finding out technologies which have less carbon footprints, etc. So these are together part of initiatives that government wants to meet that commitment of net zero carbon emission. So whatever carbon emit, you have to consume that carbon. That is the target.
Mr. Agarwal, one of the concerns that the investors have is the strengthening dollar globally. This has been a concern for all the countries in the world except the United States. Will that be a concern for India as well, which is planning to issue the sovereign green bonds in rupees, as you mentioned?
Actually, dollar is appreciating in relation to multiple currencies globally. Right. But if you look into the compare dollar versus rupee and dollar versus other currencies, you will find that the rupee has depreciated around 11%. But most of the other global strong currencies like yen from Japan or yuan or euro, they have appreciated more than 11%. In comparison to other competitive currencies, India's depreciation has been lower than other currencies. If you want to be part of the global supply chain and regional supply chain, you have to balance your currencies vis-a-vis valuation of other currencies. All times depreciation is not bad. It has to be balanced, and that is what RBI is doing, that they are balancing the rupee value vis-a-vis other currencies and also balancing it with dollar valuation. The second thing is that globally trades are settled in dollar denomination, and that at times gives the strength to dollar because it is the global settlement currencies. Yesterday, the government also announced certain bilateral trades to be settled in rupee with many countries. So that will reduce our dependence on dollar. That is also an important issue. So together with bilateral trade and settlement in rupees and balancing our currency depreciation in vis-a-vis other currencies of some comparatively competitive countries, government is looking into this matter so that our exports and import policy also align and we are part of the global and regional supply chain. And the third initiative that the government is taking about the banking settlement. So we do not depend upon the global settlement only through American system of SWIFT. So we should also have our own settlement systems like EPI and other payment gateways.
In fact, just 9 months ago in the budget speech, the finance minister had two very interesting ideas. One was the CBDC, the other was the sovereign green bonds. The CBDC has already been operationalized and the sovereign green bonds is also getting the framework now, and hopefully this will also get operationalized very soon. Mr. Agarwal, thank you so much for joining us on All India Radio and unpacking this for our listeners.
You were listening to a discussion on India's first sovereign green bonds framework. The participants were Gopal Krishna Agarwal, Economic Analyst, and Ravi Kumar, AIR Correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. And you may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.